So today we're looking at three populations. We are going to, two of them are fairly linked and then one kind of comes out of nowhere, but we're going to be looking at obesity today. So just small adjustments that we need to make for clients who are clinically obese, diabetics, which is often commonly linked to obesity. And then we're also going to be looking at pregnancy, which does not seem like it fits very well into like, these two are so strongly linked and then this one seems out of nowhere. But ironically, like some of the adjustments that you make for like your obese clients are pretty similar to the ones you'll make with like pregnant clients. So as we are looking at it, right, we know, just talking a little bit about obesity and getting some statistics out of the way, it is the fastest growing health problem in the US and most other like industrialized countries where, you know, there's a lot of wealth and access to certain types of foods and things like that. Sedentary lifestyle is very common. And so we do know that like if we are identifying like what obesity is, right, it is the overaccumulation of body fat, right? And so like when we look at like physiologically, like how our body develops body fat, right, it does that when there's an increase or an excess of calories coming in versus calories going out, right? Like if there's an imbalance there, first law of thermodynamics, energy can't be created, it can't be destroyed, it can only change form from one version to another. So if you have like calories, like energy trapped within food, you put it into your body, that's a closed system, it can't go anywhere. So it either gets burned up as energy, you do something and you physically transform that hamburger into like mechanical work, or you change it into like heat or anything like that, you can change that energy. But the amount of calories, right, the amount of energy that's in there has to go somewhere, do something. So if you don't burn it off, then what it'll do is it'll convert some of it into like glycogen, which is energy that can be burned off later in the form of carbohydrates, or it will convert it into body fat, which is, energy that can be converted later into, energy as we exercise as well. So that way, if you ever end up with like a situation, the way I always describe it to people is like your body is constantly like doomsday prepping, and your body fat is kind of like its underground vault. It's like one of these days we're going to end up, in the zombie apocalypse and I'm going to need to have plenty of energy. And so luckily I've been storing all this stuff for years, The problem is like we end up storing way too much of it because like we have an excess of calories in and we don't have enough calories going out. And so, like I said, commonly associated with an increase in energy in versus a decrease of energy out. And so as we are defining obesity, we are going to use the body mass index scale here. Now, I do not think this is like a lot of times we sometimes tie the concept of like obesity and the concept of health together. We tend to think that they are the same thing, and that's totally not true, right? I've known plenty of people who are incredibly unhealthy and they're in a normal weight range. I've known plenty of people who are considered obese who are perfectly healthy. So I don't particularly like using the body mass index as a way to judge your health, but it is pretty good to just clinically classify somebody very, very quickly, obese or not obese, right? And so as we're looking at it, how we calculate our body mass index is going to be a calculation of your height versus your weight, right? And so if we're looking at what your body mass index is, by definition is literally just a calculation, is a formula to give us one simple number. Here's a fun little fact, by the way. Here's your fun fact for the day. Body mass index, it's really quickly, it's funny, I don't do fun facts for the day on purpose. It's just my way of like segueing the fact that I know I'm tangenting. But body mass index is actually, how old is it? It's several hundred years old. I think it's from the 18th century. But it is literally just a way for like, they were looking at large parts of the population. They were sending people out to do surveys, and they were just looking at like, this part of town versus this part of town. And they were looking at their height versus their weight to determine like where the heaviest, the most out of like sync people were. And that way they were using it to like determine like, where the wealth was in these parts of the city. So that's actually what the original body mass index was for. It was never intended to be a way to judge whether or not someone is healthy. However, we do know that people who are overweight and obese on the BMI scale are at statistically at an increased risk for in developing certain comorbidities, right? Particularly diabetes and heart disease, hypertension, things like that, right? So those are the ones that are these are commonly associated with obesity. Now, again, does it mean that if you are in an obese category, you are guaranteed to get these diseases? Of course not. But it's like gambling, right? Like when you walk into a casino, there is a chance you could walk out a millionaire. The chance is small, right? But it's not like it doesn't exist. The same thing is true with the body mass index. If you fall into the obese category, it could be a sign for, it could be cause for alarm, but it could also be totally normal. So how do we calculate it? It is going to be your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. So if we look at that formula, right? Body mass index formula, caps lock is on. Yeah, it literally looks like this, right? It is your weight in kilograms, and then you divide that by your height in meters squared. So you take your height times your height, right? And that's all in meters. That's the metric version, which is the smart version. For the record, you could always do this in the American version, which is your weight in pounds. This is going to sound crazy, but is your weight in pounds divided by your height in inches squared. And then you take the entire thing and you multiply it by 703, which sounds kind of surprising. I know that sounds, a little like it's like times 703, but the number you'll get when you divide height in or weight in pounds divided by inches, it'll give you like 0.00. It'll give you this really small number. So you got to multiply it by 703 in order to get it back to sort of a normal number. So that's the body mass index, right? But the one I want you guys to know, and I want you to have this super memorized, because I can almost guarantee you will get this question somewhere, at least throughout the Sochi program, but almost guaranteed on your test. It is your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. So how do we classify body mass index? That's going to give us a number, right? Let's say that number is 24 and 0.6, right? So if we're looking at it, right, underweight is anybody, when we get that number, if that number is below 18.5, that is considered underweight. And we know that there are health risks associated with that as well. Now, again, if you are underweight, does it guarantee that you're going to have any of these comorbidities or conditions? No, of course not. But again, you are at increased risk, right? And so underweight is anything below 18.5 that is considered something that, that we want to address. Normal weight, quote unquote, is going to be anywhere from 18.5 up to 24.9. So if we had a client who is 24.6, that puts you in the normal weight category, but you are sort of like, it's normal weight. So you're not at any increased risk for any certain conditions, but we see that it's relatively, creeping up towards the top there. So again, there's no reason to be like caused for alarm, but it's something to be aware of, right? Then we have overweight, which is 25 up to 29.9. That's our overweight category. We start to see increased risk for certain diseases here. And then we have obesity, which is anything greater than 30. So those are our obesity sort of like standardized numbers there. Again, do not put too much stock into the BMI by itself. I really do not like people using it as an indicator for health. But here's the thing. If you have a client who is in the obese category and you have a client who also, has high cholesterol, right? Does that, and high cholesterol can be totally normal as well. It's when that cholesterol starts clogging your arteries that it becomes a problem. So if they have high cholesterol and normal blood pressure, is it a problem? Well, it's still something to be aware of. It's not causing problems yet, but it's something we want to be aware of. So if you have a client who's obesity and like they have high cholesterol and again, they don't have any other problems, right? They have low muscle mass. They have, poor nutrition. We started looking at, it's like we're checking a lot of like negative boxes. It's like each one of those is like, we think of it as like a risk, right? And so it's like maybe obesity is a 15% risk of having some type of chronic condition. High cholesterol is a 20% risk. Eventually, like you add all those percentages together, you're playing cards against the house, like you're gambling in not the best way. So, these are just things we want to think of. It's like we'll use football as an example, actually, because they kept talking about it during the game. Like the Seahawks Vikings game the other night. The Vikings decided to try to go for it on on the specific down rather than just kicking a field goal. And 94% statistically said that was like, the right call. And a lot of people were just like, oh, why wouldn't they just kick the field goal? Like take the 3 points, that puts you up a certain amount. And then the Seahawks ended up coming back and like winning that game because they would have tied, but no, they ended up like coming back and winning. And the announcers were like, look, we get it. There's probably people at home who are super frustrated, but like there's a 94% chance that what the Vikings did should have worked out, but it just didn't. So it's like all these things are just statistics. They're all just numbers, that's kind of what we're looking at here. If you are in the obese category, it doesn't mean that you are unhealthy. It just means that like there is a percentage of risk associated with it. So I always do a little rant whenever I'm talking about it, whenever I'm talking about body mass index, because it's so sort of misinterpreted by people. And then we, even and Nicholas and Robert, I know you guys have been through our youth class. We don't even a lot of times they don't even teach BMI properly to youths. They'll just let youths believe that they're in like these bad categories. I was told that I was like underweight when I was in like 7th or 8th grade. Like our teacher, like we did it in gym class, and everybody did their BMI, and like the whole class practically landed in some unhealthy category. And we all freaked out. And then it turns out our teacher just didn't know how to teach the BMI. Literally the next year, our other gym teacher was like, and remember, you're in these percentiles. And we were like, what the hell are percentiles? So there's like a year where I was kind of freaked out. I was like, oh man, like, what are my parents doing wrong? So anyway, like that's a classic misinterpretation of how that works. Maybe that's why I'm so sensitive to it. I'm just like, ugh. So, all right, let's talk a little bit more about obesity. We do know that there are estimates related to obesity. We see 33% of U.S. adults, men are obese, 35% of U.S. adult women are obese. We are seeing that being very, very common. We also see a higher obesity rate in Black and Hispanic communities as well. Both of those figures are going to be for people 20 years or older. If we look at like the reasons behind these things, when we like try to understand like why obesity is so common in like developing countries, it's a very large conversation. Like there's a lot of like reasons behind it. We see looking at like different areas of town, we're going to find like different types of restaurants, and like that is, I don't know if it's purposeful design, but it's certainly design and something that should be talked about a lot of times. Like, again, we look at like socioeconomic factors have a huge play on obesity. Sometimes people will say like it's their genetics. Like I have a lot of conversations. I've had a lot of tough conversations with clients, and they'll say I've been, overweight my entire life and I've always struggled with it. And, it's just part of my genetics. Like, everyone in my family is heavy. And I just like, I've always had such a hard time losing weight. And I just don't think I'm ever going to lose this weight because like, I'm just, destined to be this way. And that's such a, like, these people are frustrated. They're sad. They're angry. They're like, they've tried every diet plan that they've seen on TV. They've read all these internet ads that show them. It's like, look at how many people are successful and how easy it is to lose weight, And a lot of like what I spent a lot of my time talking about with these people is I'm like, look, like, genetics are certainly a factor here, but like when you see like those ads that say like I lost 18 pounds in 2 weeks or something, they don't have to tell the truth of like what those numbers really mean. I don't have very much weight to lose, and I could lose 18 pounds in 2 weeks. You know, just if I wore a sweatshirt and sweatpants every day and stepped into a sauna every single day, it's not actually that hard to lose 18 pounds, but losing 18 pounds of fat is incredibly difficult. You got to remember, like, glycogen, right? That storage form of carbohydrates. It is like quite literally, glycogen is quite literally 80% water. So like it's this wet, soupy carbohydrate that you store. So like you have several pounds of like water weight stored on your body. If you just cut out carbs for a couple weeks and then like sweat like crazy during the summertime, you can lose an incredible amount of weight, but it doesn't mean that you changed your body composition. And so like, to say that like you're bad at losing weight or bad at reaching your fitness goals and other people are good at it, it's unfair, because like that's not a very objective look at things, you know? So anyway, I'm sort of like ranting here because I've had so many clients who are so frustrated. And always like, I get super passionate about it where I'm just like, God, like you don't deserve to be so frustrated. Like what you deserve is like truthful, like scientific approaches to things. Is it your genetics, or is it the fact that like you grew up hearing this is considered healthy food? I mean, like, let's look at just like really quickly, look at like nutrition claims on cereal. Right? Like we're told, like when you look at like my parents to this day think that like cereal is like part of a balanced breakfast, because literally there are hundreds of commercials that say, get your cereal, it's part of a balanced breakfast, you know? And it's like, you look at like cereal boxes, you know, yeah, look at this. Cheerios can be shown to lower your cholesterol by 4% in 6 weeks. Now, if you actually read what that means, because they said this, right? And then it says see back for details, right? So let's see here. Where is, oh, they're not going to show the actual back for details? Oh, that sucks. Oh, wait. No, it doesn't say it. Okay, so anyway, I can tell you. So I was hoping to show you and see it. So when we look at like what they mean by that is like Cheerios has fiber in it. Okay, like if you look at like regular old Cheerios, you look at a regular thing of Cheerios. Hopefully, it's not going to pull up Honey Nut Cheerios. The regular one, yes, the regular one. So if you look at it, you'll notice that it has 3 grams of fiber. That's probably fairly hard for you to see because it's kind of blurry. But if you look at it, this says 3 grams of fiber per serving, right? So if you have 1 cup of Cheerios, that's going to have 3 grams of fiber in it. And what they have found statistically, and this is true, if you increase your fiber intake, it can lower your cholesterol.
Sir.
Right? So like, because this has an ingredient in it that has been shown to lower cholesterol, they're like, well, fiber's been shown to lower cholesterol. This has fiber in it. Cheerios lowers cholesterol.
Exactly.
That is not how the world works.
I got a question though.
Yeah. Please.
My thing is, when you look at things like that, you got to think about what the ingredients in there, the ingredients that's in the cereal.
Totally.
These are, and it's fiber. It's fiber. We know that.
Yeah.
But these are fibers that do not cause inflammation. Inflammation is what makes people change, that makes people look different. If you don't, you know what I'm saying, you can be having inflammation everywhere, and that's a DNA, that's what makes you look different. You know what I'm saying? Inflammation. Sure. You know what I'm saying? When you have inflammation that, you know what I'm saying, that swells up somewhere, then it causes your body aches and things like that. You get high cholesterol, you get all these things through inflammation, man. Well, if you was control that inflammation, you control all the other things. You know what I'm saying?
Here's the thing though, right? Like, so, and here's the, like, look at the ingredients in Cheerios. They're not actually that bad, right? It's whole grains, cornstarch is not great, sugar, not great. Salt, as long, what's the sodium level? 140 milligrams. Yeah, that's fine. This amount of salt. Like, try potassium phosphate. It's actually not that bad for you, by the way. All that is just a little bit of like potassium and phosphorus, and then vitamin E. So like all of these ingredients are decent. This is a fairly like whole food. But like the thing is, you are allowed to like, they're just allowed to say like these things, and they're very easy to misinterpret, right? Like this says simply made, like it's gluten free, right? So when somebody sees something like that, we've associated over time like the idea like gluten free means healthy, and those aren't the same thing, you know? Um, so they're just misinterpretations of like how this works. Just like, you know, like when you see something like tripotassium phosphate, that might like freak you out, right? Or when we see like salt, you know, that freaks people out because people think that like salt is bad for you, and salt in high levels is bad for you, 100%. But like sodium is a totally normal ingredient that like we absolutely, it's essential to our life. We cannot survive without sodium. It is a 100% essential mineral, right? So looking at like, you know, inflammation and stuff, right? A lot of times people will look at these things and they'll say like, this has been shown to reduce inflammation. This food has been shown to reduce inflammation, right? And like, I'm definitely not against reducing like inflammation. That's great. You're going to feel better. You're going to look better. It's all awesome. But when you put that on a label, you can have an ingredient that has been linked to in one study or maybe two studies to reduce inflammation. Then you get to like slap that on the label, and then everybody starts associating this with like, just like, oh, that means it's healthy, right? Like we're still in the middle of this world where we think that like stuff that has added protein is healthy, because like we're in the middle of this like, you know, anti-carb thing. And take a look right there. Like, look, there's even Cheerios again, right? Cheerios with protein in it, right? And don't get me wrong, you absolutely need to have protein in your diet. It's a huge essential part of your diet, right? But like having protein does not mean healthy, right? And that's where we start to run into a lot of these problems. People will start blaming their genetics when in fact, like, it's probably just the fact that like you grew up in a household that that was taught nutrition a specific way because that's how they learned it from someone else, and that's how they learned it growing up. And it's like, if your habits are similar to the people around you, you're going to have similar results. Everything, function follows form, right? Everything looks a certain way if it's designed a certain way. So we definitely know that like inflammation, like for instance, it's a problem, right? But I would argue that like it's not necessarily inflammation that's causing problems. I think it's problems that are causing inflammation, because that's what your body does when it's under stress. It
That's
goes,
why we
oh,
call food allergies, right?
yeah, right. Totally. Sometimes it's food allergies. Sometimes it's also just like lifestyle choices, you know?
Yeah.
But like my favorite way to phrase this, I always say the same thing. But it's like when your body doesn't know what to do with something, it goes, what is that? I don't know what that is. Put some cells around that. You know, like that's kind of your body's response to a lot of different things. Like when it doesn't know what something is, it's like a little kid who shoves stuff under their bed or into their closet and then like closes the door, and it's like, did you clean your room? It's like, yeah. Yeah. I mean, by clean my room, do you mean there's not stuff on the floor? Yes. You know. Anybody else do that? Or was that just me? Can I tell you the laziest thing I ever did when I was a kid? One time I totally got caught for it and got in big trouble. My mom grounded me for a week. One time my mom told me to put my laundry away, and I just didn't want to. And so this is so lazy. The laziness was more work than putting my clothes away. But I laid them flat on my bed and then made my bed over top of it. It's the laziest thing I've ever done in my entire life. I still haven't topped that to this day. I just laid them in such a way that it would look as if my bed was still the same height. But that's like what your body does. You know, your body, when you tear a muscle or tear a ligament, it, you know, swells up with fluid, right? When you get like some type of food allergy, right, you'll sometimes get like, you know, fluid buildup. When you get a mosquito bite, you'll get a fluid buildup. You know, like that is very much what your body does, and your body can't function the way it's supposed to. So speaking of not functioning the way it's supposed to, let's look at some of the risks associated with obesity, right? So we do see some physiologic responses associated with obesity. These are, again, those, like I said, increased risk factors, right? So we see increased insulin response to glucose, and we see higher fasting glucose levels. So there is something particularly dangerous about abdominal fat in particular. Obviously, like high body fat percentages, again, we have been shown to be linked to certain diseases, right? But particularly abdominal fat is the most dangerous type, because it starts acting kind of like its own organ in a way. Remember, like when we go back, some of you guys have heard this and some of you haven't. But if we were to like classify like tissues throughout the body, right? You have chemicals, which are like atoms. Chemicals make up cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. Organs make up systems. Systems make up organisms like us, right? We're made of cardiovascular, muscular, skeletal systems, right? Made of all these different things coming together. So a series of tissue or a series of cells all coming together is what makes up like a tissue. A series of tissues coming together is what makes up an organ. Abdominal fat starts to act like an organ when there's a lot of it, which is really interesting. And we're still doing research on this. We don't really 100% know why. But like we do see that like that organ starts to really crave sugar and things like that. And so you see increased insulin responses to glucose. When your body brings in some type of sugar, your body goes, holy crap, that's a lot of sugar. We got to get that sugar out of the blood. And so it goes, boom, and it makes a ton of insulin because it gets really sensitive to it, right? And then when you get like so much insulin running through your body, the problem with that is insulin kind of acts in the same way like caffeine acts with us, where our body gets used to that insulin. And then it becomes insulin resistant. So then it'll go, all right, I've got all this insulin. It's there to drive that sugar out of my blood and either convert it to glycogen, use it for energy, or convert it into body fat, right? And so your body will then go, all right, well, we've got all this insulin, let's use it up. And so it uses all of it because it's been like resistant to it. It's like, not enough. Oh, now I've got a ton. And then, and it just pulls all the sugar out of your blood. Like there's nothing left, right? And now you're super low blood sugar and you're like, holy crap, I need to eat something right now. I'm going to kill somebody, right? So then you crave something that is very high in calories and easy to process calories. And sure enough, like, you've got some sugary sweet thing that's right there. So then you eat that, and what causes is a massive spike in your blood sugar. And there we are, we're right back in what's called a positive feedback loop, right? So, we do see that like excessive abdominal fat decreases your insulin sensitivity and increases your insulin response. Your body will make more insulin, but it will be less sensitive to that insulin. It's just like when you first started drinking coffee, maybe you needed 1 cup. Now you're like, I'm going to drink a whole pot of coffee. Your body comes less sensitive. We also see decreased. Oh yeah, question.
So are diabetes and low blood sugar like kind of linked together? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, that's the thing. Like diabetes can lead. Diabetes is associated with high blood sugar, right? Diabetes is associated with sugar staying in your blood. And then the reason that's so dangerous is because it actually suffocates your cells. There's so much sugar around that like your cells can't absorb like other nutrients that they need, because it's just like an environment that makes it very difficult for other nutrients to like chemically attach and deattach to like other chemicals, right? So it becomes like a problem there. So that's what's kind of weird about this. You're like, wait, we just talked about how like it causes like low blood sugar sometimes. Well, when you are a diabetic, what you'll often do is like create this massive amount of insulin. And when it finally starts acting, right, when it finally starts binding, remember one of the things about like chemistry, I think we talked about this at one point, but like proteins in particular, right? Proteins, when they bind to something, it encourages them to change shape, and then changing shape encourages more binding. So basically on a chemical level, on a chemistry level, all this sugar is super, super, super elevated and it's having no effect, right? No effect. And then finally a little bit of it gets through and starts to have an effect. And that creates a chain reaction that sucks all that sugar out of your blood. And then all of a sudden, like it all does what it's supposed to do, but you've created so much insulin at this point that boom, all that sugar gets out of your blood. So you were already getting like negative effects when there was all that sugar. Your cells were basically suffocating during that time. Then all of a sudden, you pulled all the sugar out of your blood, and now you've got a headache, you're cranky, you've got all this low blood sugar problems. So what are you going to do? You're going to go eat something like, you know, in very, very large amounts and flood that system again. And your body's going to go right back into the same process of creating all that extra insulin. Meanwhile, while it's finally waiting to finally take effect, your cells are suffocating again because they're in this super high sugar environment. Does that make sense? Oh, did I lose you? Oh, okay. And that's the thing. Like when you look at like what is peripheral nerve. When I say like suffocating, by the way, just for those of you who we're gonna see this when we get down to diabetes in just a second. Actually, we're actually not even in diabetes yet. We're actually still only talking about obesity, but we will get to diabetes in just a minute. So there's a common comorbidity with diabetes called peripheral neuropathy. So neuropathy is where you have a damaged nerve. So like you guys know Arnold or Sylvester Stallone, right? Sylvester Stallone, facial paralysis. You know why Sylvester Stallone talks the way he talks? And why he's got the like kind of droopy side of his face. When he was a kid, he was a difficult delivery apparently, and the doctor had to use like forceps to like yank him out. And unfortunately, it clipped a nerve in his face, and that's why like he has slight facial paralysis. That's why Sylvester Stallone kind of talks like this. That's why he talks the way he talks. Not because he's from Philadelphia. So that's kind of there's another fun, weird fact for the day. So what he has is he's experiencing neuropathy, right? And neuropathy is another term for nerve damage, okay? So what you can end up with diabetes is what is known as peripheral neuropathy. And what that is you are experiencing nerve damage in the peripheral, like around the outside of your body. So typically this affects your fingers, toes, feet, hands, things like that. Areas that are kind of far away, they're little tiny blood vessels, little tiny muscles. And this is why like you will see sometimes like diabetics, one of the most important things that we have, and we're going to talk about this when we get down here to diabetics, one of the most important things that we can do for clients who are diabetic is ensure that they have proper footwear. That sounds super weird. It's like, why would a trainer be in charge of making sure their client's wearing the right type of shoes? But it's huge because like if we give our clients like, you know, high impact exercises or high repetition exercises where there's just going to be a lot of friction, like say they're going to walk a mile on the treadmill, right? That's friction in the feet over and over and over again. And let's say they end up with like a blister, they're not going to be able to feel it because they have nerve damage in their feet. So they won't feel that blister happen. And then if that blister gets infected, all of a sudden those tissues can't repair as quickly. And that peripheral neuropathy can lead to, you know, things like gangrene and you know, conditions that often result in like that tissue needing to be like removed from the body. So very dangerous stuff there as well. So peripheral neuropathy, that's an example of what I'm talking about when I say like your nerve system, your nervous cells, they need oxygen in order to live. And if they cannot bind to that oxygen because there's so much sugar in the area, that's why this is so dangerous. Because that's the thing, right? Like sometimes people ask me, they're like, well, what's so dangerous about having sugar in your blood? We're supposed to have sugar in our blood. You know, we need to have, when your blood sugar is too low, you can't operate very well, right? You feel low energy, you feel cranky, and, you know, so we need sugar in our blood. It's just when it becomes excessive that we start to have really bad problems. So other associations with obesity, we also see a decrease in growth hormone. Again, body tissues are not going to repair as quickly. Building new tissues is not going to happen as quickly. We see low bone density. We see low muscle mass associated with decreased growth hormone. And we see increased adrenocortical hormones, which is a big fancy way of saying cortisol. So Noel, we're right back to your conversation, right? We start talking about creating like cortisol and other stress hormones. So cortisol is this kind of, it is another one that's kind of been in a way misinterpreted. when we hear cortisol, we should be thinking like, oh yeah, I want to reduce my cortisol levels by as much as possible. Totally true. I actually have nothing against like that approach to things. But to be fair, from like a biologic perspective, cortisol is actually not an evil hormone. It's just something that we produce way too much of based on the way we live our lives. So cortisol is a fat building hormone. Again, remember, fat is a good thing until it becomes like in incredibly excessive amounts, right? So like we like the fact that our body produces cortisol. We just live in a world where we're producing way too much of it. And we do know that like increased abdominal fat has been associated with an increased production of that cortisol. And so by having excessive body fat, it encourages you to produce even more excessive body fat. Your body is less likely to store things as glycogen and more likely to store things as body fat. So one of the tough things about like gaining weight is that it makes it easier for you to continue gaining weight. And then we also see increased cholesterol synthesis. Again, cholesterol is very, very good for us. We need cholesterol to produce hormones, but when we have excessive levels of it, guess what? That can lead to hypertension, that can lead to blocked arteries, that can lead to blood clots, all kinds of really, really negative things. So this is why, again, you are not going, I'm not saying you are going to deal with these things if you have a client who's obese. They're not guaranteed to get any of these conditions, but we do see obesity linked to these conditions, right? So what are our recommendations when working with obesity clients, right? What are our recommendations in general if we're considering our FIT principles, and we're gonna write some soap notes, right? Well, circuit style training has been shown to be very effective. One of my clients asked me yesterday, like, well, why are we doing this in like a row? Why don't we take rest after everything? And it's like, well, it's just a much more efficient way of getting more work done in less time. And it feels like we're doing a little bit of cardio while we are also working on our strength training, you know? So circuit styles training is great for our obese clients because it's going to burn a lot of calories while still benefiting from the increased muscle mass of working out, right? And so like increasing muscle mass, we do know that muscle mass burns some of the most calories in your entire body. And so because muscle tissue is a very hungry, active tissue, we like increasing muscle mass in our clients by as much as possible. If we can increase the muscle mass in our clients, they're going to burn calories while they're sitting on the couch. They're going to burn calories while they're in bed. They're going to burn calories while they're at work. They're going to burn calories while they're watching a movie, in addition to just burning calories while they're working out. And that's another classic mistake that a lot of people make. People will focus on like weight loss routines, and they'll do lots and tons and tons and tons and tons of cardio, trying to burn as many calories as possible. And you guys know me, I am pro cardio. But the problem with only doing cardio, hours and hours of it, is that it's, number one, exhausting. And what that does is that means that like you are less likely to move throughout the rest of your day. And guess what? Those calories might become a wash by the end of the day. You know, if I don't work out and I burn 2,500 calories in a day, and then another day goes by and I do work out in the morning, I burn 500 calories in the morning, but then I'm so tired because of my workout, I'm just wiped out and kind of exhausted that I decide to take a nap in the afternoon and ended up only burning 2,000 calories throughout the day. 2,000 calories plus the 2,500, those 2 days were exactly the same. I burned the same number of calories on the day that I worked out as I did on the day I didn't work out. Because my body balanced things out by making me sleepy, you know? So we definitely know that like increasing muscle mass by getting you to just burn calories passively throughout the day is a really effective weight loss strategy. We also want to keep our exercises performed in a seated, or if we can handle it, standing position. And so again, we're focusing on calorie burns here. You burn more calories when you're on your feet. So we really like things like that. Just trying to ensure that our client is burning as many calories during their session as possible. Single leg balance is preferred over single leg squat if they can't handle it. Self-myofascial release is very, very popular. However, we should be cautious because like sometimes it can be difficult to hold yourself up on that foam roller. So instead, there are a lot of other really good techniques that still apply self-myofascial release without being foam rollers. So things like tiger tails, for instance, that's that little like stick, is that little stick that you can use to like foam roll. That can be a really effective tool. Using like a Theracane, right? Which I used to have one of these until it got stolen out of my freaking car. Uh, these are really great. They're just like a little like neck and back massager. You know, you can use it to like get into areas. If you have overactive traps, for instance, this is kind of a helpful one because you can just hook around there and then you don't have to, you know, hold yourself up all the time. So that's a really effective tool. And typically we're going to focus on phases 1 and 2 of the OPT model because those are our 2 highest calorie burners. Could you do phase 3? Of course, that's hypertrophy. And again, gaining lean muscle mass can also be a really effective weight loss strategy. But typically if we are focused on like calorie burns while still trying to build some muscle, phases 1 and 2 are really great for that. So when it comes to our mode, so type on our fit principles, right? We're going to choose low impact exercises such as treadmill walking. Rowing is a really good one. I actually really love rowing because it's like total body. It's a great way to kind of evenly distribute blood throughout the body, and it is incredibly low impact. Or using like a stationary bike. All of those are going to be really effective choices. Mode, our frequency, we're going to go about 5 times per week. We do want to keep that calorie burn frequent. So one of the reasons we're going exercising 5 days per week, you know, we've talked about, well, what about doing like 3 days per week and doing higher intensity? So that actually is really effective as well. But what's nice about exercising more often, and one thing we haven't talked about, Noel, we haven't talked about this, and Nicholas, I don't think you've heard this either, is one of the cool phenomenons that our bodies have is that when we exercise, we actually have an elevated calorie burn after we're done exercising. It's called EPOC. It stands for excess post-exercise, so after exercise is over, oxygen consumption. And basically, whenever you work out, your body actually burns elevated calories for a couple hours after that workout. So we want to make sure that we're kind of resetting that increased calorie burn. And that's why I like exercising 5 days per week can be really effective. You're also going to notice this is going to correspond with relatively lower intensities throughout the rest of our fit principles here. So because of those lower intensities, we want to go with a higher frequency. Speaking of intensity, about 60 to 80% of your max heart rate. So again, we can go up to stage 2 in terms of our cardio, but generally we're going to be around stage 1, really working on like building up our endurance. Now, a lot of times, one of the things that's really effective with obese clients in particular is using the talk test because their heart may be able to keep up and the exercise is not necessarily super intense like heart rate wise, but sometimes it can be very difficult to keep your breath up. And so like because of like that increased body weight, it can be difficult to expand the diaphragm and draw air in. So sometimes people will be more out of breath than their heart rate may be indicating. So we want to use the talk test here with our obese clients, and just a really great way to be like, okay, I want you to be able to hold a conversation with me right now because we're maybe doing long duration cardio. But then if we're doing things like HIIT training, like interval training, hey, no. Sorry, dogs. If we're doing like interval training, right, then we're going to focus more on, it's like, okay, I want you to be out of breath for about a minute. Then I want you to recover and you should be able to hold a conversation for about 2 minutes. So we're kind of alternating between the two. Duration, 40 to 60 minutes a day. Alternatively, you can do 2 20-minute sessions. This is actually a really effective strategy. I really like the 20 to 30 minutes twice per day method. If I have like a weight loss program, even on times like when I used to be a little more into like the bodybuilding side of things when I was younger and cared a little bit more about stuff like that, you know, and I would go through like bulking and cutting cycles and stuff. Whenever, you know, I don't really have a hard time like losing weight. My biggest struggle is honestly gaining muscle. But like on times I'm like, you know, it's time to like trim down a little bit and get this, you know, I'm down to the 4-pack. I need to get the 6-pack back, right? I would often do like a twice a day method. I would get up in the morning to do my workouts. And then later on at night, like I would like listen to an audiobook and go for a walk. And walking is a great way to burn like a substantial amount of calories without completely exhausting you for your next day's workout. So that can be a really effective strategy there, you know, rather than these big long sessions where you'll hear people be like, I do 2 hours in the gym and I don't know why I'm not losing weight. And a lot of times the answer is you're not losing weight because you're doing 2 hours in the gym. You're completely exhausted. So you're burning less calories throughout the rest of the day because you're just laying around wiped out. Let's break it up a little bit and get you less wiped out and get you more effectively burning calories in general. Our assessments, this is normal stuff, push, pull, single leg squat. I'm sorry, push, pull, squat, single leg balance. If you can do the single leg squat, go for it, you know. SMR, foam rolling if it's tolerated, but if not, just follow, you can use like tiger tails or other massage materials, and then your regular flexibility continuum. Obese clients, it doesn't matter. Static stretches, active stretches, and dynamic stretches are all going to be effective. When it comes to your resistance training, you're going to see we're going to focus on generally high repetitions, like medium. This is really medium intensity, medium to low intensity here. Again, that's phases 1 and 2 primarily. So 1 to 3 sets, 10 to 15 repetitions, nothing surprising there. And then our special considerations, make sure your client is always comfortable. Make sure there's no like self-consciousness happening. And then ensure that you are doing as many seated or at least standing or at least seated exercises as possible. Any questions about our alterations or anything like that? Any questions about how we would do that? Nope, feeling good, guys? Okay, let's look at diabetics, right? We've kind of already talked a little bit about it, but diabetes, a condition where your client is going to have impaired glucose control. So we are going to see 2 types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetes are going to be what are known as insulin-dependent diabetes. So this is a client who literally has a bum pancreas. Your pancreas's job is to produce insulin and glucagon, and insulin's job is to drive sugar out of your blood. If you have a bum pancreas that does not create enough of that insulin, well, that sugar is going to stay in your blood, and that's going to result in what is called hyperglycemia, elevated blood sugar, and that is what causes a lot of cellular problems. It's pretty rare. We don't see a lot of type 1 cases. In fact, only 5% of all diabetic cases are type 1, but it is something that can happen. So what often happens is that your clients will need to inject synthetic insulin in order to, you know, make up for the fact that their pancreas doesn't create it naturally. And so they'll inject insulin into their body, and that will sort of act as their pancreas. Now, if your client takes too much insulin, which can happen sometimes, that can drive all of the sugar out of their blood, and that can result in hypoglycemia. This can also happen if the pancreas tries to produce too much glucagon. So the opposite of insulin is this other hormone called glucagon. Glucagon's job is to actually release glycogen from your muscles into your bloodstream. So we have all this stored sugar in our body. Glucagon's job is to tell your body to release it. And so if you produce like too much glucagon and your body ends up lowering your blood sugar levels way too low, you can end up as hypoglycemic, which is low blood sugar levels. And that's where you'll hear about like a type 1 or a type 2 diabetic. You know, sometimes they'll inject themselves with too much insulin and they'll pass out. That's often due to hypoglycemia. So a lot of times you can actually also get hypoglycemic. Anybody in here who's ever donated blood, the reason they give you like OJ afterwards, right? They'll like drink some orange juice, have like a granola bar. The reason they do that is because they're trying to get your blood sugar levels back to normal because they just took some of it away down that cart. Now type 2 diabetes are your insulin resistant diabetes. So before we were having trouble making enough insulin, now our body produces plenty of insulin, but our cells have become resistant to it. And so this is often referred to as adult onset diabetes. And that often results in chronic hyperglycemia. So because the cells are resistant to that insulin, those sugar levels stay high. And with those sugar levels staying high, it can cause a lot of nerve damage. And so we start to see a lot of problems in the heart, nerve, kidneys. We can see like blood pressure problems, circulatory system, and then we see things like glaucoma, for instance. So the eyes have really small blood vessels as well. And so if you damage the vessels in your eyes, it will result in damage that is often very difficult to repair. So we do see common problems with that. Now, like I said, diabetes is commonly associated with obesity. So a lot of times what we'll look at for our considerations here is we will instruct our clients. Oh, actually, hold on one second before we get to this. these are some notes that I put in here that are not in the PowerPoint. Chronic high blood sugar can lead to damage in the nerves. So that is what we refer to as neuropathy. It can result in damage to the kidneys. So your kidneys have to process other materials that they really shouldn't have to be processing, because your kidneys are kind of like the body's filter, right? And so if they have to filter out more materials, that can lead to them being damaged. And it can lead to glaucoma, like I said, nerve damage in the eyes. So our considerations that we make, a lot of times we'll do a reduction of calories, but more important to that is actually a 1,000 to 2,000 caloric burn through exercise per week. So we actually want to encourage our clients to move more often if they are diabetics. Now, what that does, right, is when you are exercising at a higher intensity, your body is going to burn carbohydrates as a fuel source. So we see like, so when we look at our exercise intensity, right, you can see this chart looks like this, right? We have fat, which is the amount of energy being, I'm sorry, we have the red here, which is the amount of energy being burned from carbohydrates. And we see the blue here, which is the amount of energy burned from fat. Wait, I had it backwards, I'm sorry. Fat is red, carbohydrates are blue. And then down here, we have our exercise intensity. So if our intensity is at 0, we are burning most of our energy from fat. If our intensity is at 100%, meaning maximum effort, right, our energy being burned is mostly from carbohydrates. So right in here, this little area where they cross over each other, that, which is about 60% of your maximum intensity, is the fat burning zone. So it does not mean, like, a lot of times people will see that treadmill sticker and it'll say your fat burning zone is this is what your heart rate should be, and they'll think, oh great, I want to burn fat, and it turns out they're working at a super low intensity. So we actually want our clients to burn between 1,000 to 2,000 calories per week, and we want it to be relatively high intensity. Now you might be asking yourself, it's like, well, why would I care about burning carbohydrates? I want to burn body fat, right? Well, it's almost like getting ahead of your bills in a way, or getting ahead of your bank account. Yes, you are going to be burning calories from carbohydrates. But here's the thing. The next time you go to eat food, your body is then going to go, okay, well, I've got this excess of calories. Where am I going to store these calories? And it's either going to choose to store it as carbohydrates or it's going to choose to store it as fat. And if you've burned away the carbohydrates, your body's going to go, great, I'll use these extra calories and store them in my glycogen, which is again going to be used for energy later. So then you don't store it as fat. So you are essentially burning fat. You're just doing it in the future. You know what I mean? So that's, and here's the other thing. By burning those carbohydrates, you are making your body more sensitive to burning carbohydrates for energy rather than burning, you're making your body more sensitive to bringing those carbohydrates out of your glycogen stores. So you are increasing your insulin sensitivity. And that's why we want to focus on burning 1,000 to 2,000 calories from exercise activity per week. And that's why, like, clients who have diabetics shouldn't just diet alone. Diet, hugely important, but activity is also incredibly, incredibly important. You should always make sure that your client has measured their blood glucose levels before they start exercising. You do not want to end up with a client who has injected themselves with insulin and then end up low blood sugar, and then as they're going up the stairs, they pass out on the way to the workout. Make sure that doesn't happen. So make sure your client has measured their glucose levels appropriately. You want to encourage your client to increase their intake of complex carbohydrates. So we want to eat more complex carbohydrates rather than simple ones, because simple ones are so easy to break down. They get into your blood and then they enter your, or they get into your body and they enter your blood sugar. They raise your blood sugar almost instantly. Complex carbohydrates take your digestive system more time to break down. So because it takes more time for those to be broken down, that is going to mean that enters your sugar more slowly, that enters your blood more slowly. When it enters your blood more slowly, your body is going to be able to burn that energy as it comes, rather than going, well, heck, I have all this energy, I need to store it, right? Again, that's what we're trying to avoid. Use weight-bearing exercises cautiously. And wear appropriate footwear. So this is kind of an interesting one. A lot of times you hear me talk about how good weight-bearing exercise is for your clients. And again, it is because it does burn a lot of calories, but we do need to be cautious with our diabetic clients because again, if you get a bruise or if you get a cut or something like that and you have a neuropathy, you might not know it. And if you don't know it, it can get infected. If it gets infected, that's very, very, very dangerous. And with improved insulin sensitivity, make sure you are encouraging, sorry, I got ahead of the PowerPoints here. Make sure you are encouraging your client to continually talk to their doctor about adjusting their insulin medication. The last thing you want, and I've experienced this so many different times in my career, you're working with somebody for a couple of weeks and then all of a sudden they'll start complaining. They're like, man, I've just been like feeling kind of crappy lately. I feel nauseous. I get tired a lot throughout the day. And because of what is happening is like, it's like, have you talked to your doctor about like changing your medication? Like, if you get your blood sugar levels tested lately? And they're like, no, but I've made an appointment for next week. And then they'll go in and be like, I need less insulin now. And it's like, hell yeah, you do. You've resensitized your body, right? So they've been taking this high dose of insulin and it's been like driving sugar out of their blood and it's been making them nauseous and cranky and, you know, all these different things. So that is consideration. Don't tell your client to take less insulin. Do not ever, ever, ever do that, but encourage them to communicate with their doctor. So low impact exercise, again, we want to go low impact because we don't want to end up with any cuts, bruises, or blisters. Rowing and stationary cycling, that's the same frequency, 4 to 7 days per week. This is interesting. We give ourselves like a wider range here. You know, with obese clients, we were encouraging like 5 days a week because we were doing like relatively low to moderate intensity. Here, we can go even lower on the days per week, but we also can go higher. So we're going to see a really wide range. And that's just because you're going to see some diabetics who need daily exercise. You're going to see some diabetics who need less exercise. Depends on where they are in that journey. And again, because of that wide range there, guess what? We see a really wide range here. 50, which is low intensity, up to 90% of their max heart rate. If they can handle the high intensity stuff, go for it. But if they can't, make sure you're being cautious. Again, super wide range here as well. It's 20 to 60 minutes in terms of our duration. And these should correspond. If you're doing 90%, guess what? That's the low duration. If they're doing low intensity, that's the high duration, right? They're going to be inverse to each other. And then you can do all assessments. You know, some clients, you know, you're not just going to have clients who have poor balance and stuff. So pushing assessment, pulling assessment, overhead squat assessment, single leg squat assessment, all of them are good. Flexibility continuum, same process, all of them are good. Be cautious on foam rolling. Again, you don't want to give your client a bruise if they have neuropathy. It doesn't say that there, but you know, oh, it does actually say it. I was like, man, I keep saying all these things. I'm like, it doesn't say it here. It says it down here. Use foam rolling with special care. If like they are okay, right? If they do have neuropathy, make sure you're being a little cautious. You do not want to bruise your clients who have neuropathy. They won't be able to feel it. And then, you know, they might end up with like nerve, you know, that nerve damage could lead to tissue damage. So we don't want to do that. And then we see, again, moderate intensity here, 1 to 3 sets, 10 to 15 reps, kind of the same as obesity, right? Make sure your client have appropriate footwear. We've already talked about that. And then also make sure you have a snack handy. I've definitely had, you know, clients where they're diabetics and out of nowhere, the blood sugar will just like fall through the floor. And all of a sudden they'll feel like they're going to pass out. And it's like, hey, your blood sugar was good when you walked in. And they're like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. So just make sure you can go get like a, you know, something from the juice bar or something, a smoothie or a banana.
I got a question.
Yeah, please.
Like pre-diabetes, you still get the same results as you was as diabetics, right?
Oh, yes. It's not where I thought you were going. I was like, well, yeah, no, absolutely. Still the same positive benefits. So pre-diabetics, right? Pre-diabetics means that they are experiencing elevated blood sugar levels, but they don't have any of the like super negative effects, right? Like your risk of neuropathy is minimal, you know, compared to an actual diabetic. So we want to make sure that like a pre-diabetic doesn't end up in the diabetic category. So our priority is going to be burning plenty of calories throughout the week and making sure those glycogen stores are continually getting used up rather than sitting full all the time. So we like high intensity exercise. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anytime I have a client who's like pre-diabetic, I'm like, all right, you are audiobooking it. And I'm like, all right, you gotta get your Audible account started, and let's get you lifting weights, and then later on in the day, let's get you walking,
Early, huh?
What's that?
Say early.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Yeah, spread it out so that they don't, we don't want to end up in that diabetic category. Because once you go on insulin, it really does kind of play with your sensitivity a little bit, All right, so now we're looking at pregnancy. Now, this is kind of an interesting one because it's like, what does that have to do with diabetes? Well, not much, but you're going to notice a lot of our adjustments are fairly similar to obesity. So when it comes to pregnancy, we do see a lot of times women will have decreased oxygen availability. So they're going to experience shortness of breath, kind of similar to the same way like obese clients will. And that's because the diaphragm is going to have a little bit of trouble expanding. And at the same time, some of that oxygen that they are bringing in is not going to their tissues, it's going to another human's tissues. So because of that, they don't have as much oxygen available. So shortness of breath is going to be very common in our prenatal clients, right? Other considerations, we do see some high risk pregnancy considerations if your client is older than 35 or has had a history of miscarriages. Those can be risk factors. So if that is the case, we want to make sure we're being extra cautious when it comes to exercise. They should be watching for things like thyroid disorders, diabetes, anemia. And if they have a sedentary lifestyle and then all of a sudden their doctor has encouraged them to be more active during their pregnancy, that could be a slightly higher risk as well. So we want to make sure that we're being cautious here. Don't overdo it with your pregnant clients, right? Now, some of the considerations a lot of times people will get nervous with is they'll consider that your posture can limit blood flow to the uterus, and therefore the fetus may not be getting as much blood flow. So you do have to be a little cautious there. However, that does not mean that they shouldn't exercise. There's another common misconception oh, I'm pregnant, I gotta stay off my feet for the rest of the pregnancy. If you're a high risk pregnancy and that is what your doctor has recommended, of course you should listen to your doctor, but it does not mean, it's not the same thing, right? Again, Cheerios does not lower cholesterol. Fiber lowers cholesterol. Cheerios have fiber. Those are not the same thing, right? And I'm not crapping on Cheerios. If you want to, if that's where you're getting your fiber from and that's your choice, great, go for it. I'm not anti-Cheerios, but to say that it's like a medicine, sorry, I'm back on a rant. So with your pregnant clients, other things you want to do, avoid prone or supine body positions because it can affect that blood flow. So do not lay your pregnant clients down. Do not lay your pregnant clients face up either. For the most part, you're going to be in a seated upright position. That is going to be the most safe position. We're also going to see, even in the absence of exercise, we are going to see an increased metabolic demand of about 300 calories per day in order to maintain that energy balance. And so, you think about a little infant inside the body, it's burning about 300 calories per day on average. That goes up even higher in the later stages of pregnancy. And then this is one that, trust me, if you ever have a client who's pregnant and you are training them, you will not be able to forget this last one, which is there are going to be thermoregulation changes. Your clients are going to experience changes in body temperature super rapidly. They'll be like, I'm hot and I'm cranky and it's your fault and I hate you. And it's like, hey, I'm just here to make you do squats. I didn't control the thermostat. But trust me, your clients will get a little irritable pretty easily. Thermoregulation changes, there's just a lot of hormonal changes, and hormonal changes often kick up the metabolism at very weird times. So then all of a sudden your body is producing tons of energy, and all that energy doesn't really have anywhere to go. And so what it does is it raises body temperature. So be aware of that. And then obviously the last one here, and I love this, during the third trimester, it does not mean that you need to stop exercising, but a logical reduction in exercise will likely be necessary. Meaning, yeah, bring it back. Let's not do any burpees while you're in the 3rd trimester, but it doesn't mean that you can't be active. My friend Troy was running like up until like the day before she had her daughter. Granted, Troy is a crazy person, and Troy is also like one of the fittest ladies I have ever known in my life. But you can still exercise in the 3rd trimester. It does not mean you need to be inactive. However, it should all be based on your doctor's recommendations. If your doctor tells you to like reduce your exercise, your client should listen to them. Their mode, right? Light and low impact exercises or step aerobics, anything that avoids like jarring motions. Box jumps, probably not your best friend during pregnancy. Treadmill walking, stationary cycling, water activities are great. A lot of times your pregnant clients are going to complain about like impact and gravity and things like that. And so like water aerobics are a super great way to take all that pressure off the joints. Because pregnancy does cause massive amounts of like inflammation of the joints and stuff. So it can be very kind of like achy and painful. So get them in the water. It's great. Takes all that pressure off, makes them feel a lot better. That creates a lot less stress hormones. Those stress hormones may result in less water retention. 3 to 5 days per week, nothing surprising there. Intensity, this is kind of an interesting one. We see like about 140 beats per minute up to 160. Now that is kind of interesting because it's like actual numbers of beats per minute without knowing who the client is. But the assumption here is that you have a client who is somewhere around like the age of like 20 to 35, that's where we see most pregnancies. So these are normal like heart rates for clients in that age. Again, in my opinion, go back to your zone 1 calculations and use that instead. That's what I've always had much more success with. For the record, again, 20 to 35, that's going to be these numbers right here. But, use your zone 1 recommendations. Your duration, probably 15 to 30 minutes per day. The reason we don't see a longer duration here, even though the intensity is relatively low, is just because, again, like those alterations in like the joints and stuff, it's going to be kind of achy. And so we're going to do a logical reduction here of just like reducing our time. Your assessments can be totally normal: pushing, pulling, overhead squat, single leg squat. All that's totally normal. Stretches, we're going to focus primarily on static stretches or active stretches. Dynamic stretches aren't super recommended just because a lot of like arm circles, that's totally safe. But like, walking lunges with a twist, the high leg kicks like Frankenstein walks, butt kickers, high knees, things like that. A lot of times those dynamic stretches can be a little high impact. And so we're going to avoid those for the most part. So we're focusing on like stages 1 and 2. Levels 1 and 2. And then resistance training 2 to 3 days per week. And again, we're going to use light load. So we're focusing, as the repetitions are relatively high here. And that way we can keep the weight relatively low. And that way it's not, again, going to be high impact. And then lastly, again, avoid those prone or supine positions with your clients. And that's it, guys. We got through 3 populations today. My recommendations, check out, again, those pages. I think it's going to start on page 421. Actually, did I say at the top of the PowerPoint? No. So check out your chapter 16 in your textbook so you can kind of go through that. I did want to really quickly show you an example SOAP note for one of our clients here. So this is Diane. She is a CPA, she's an accountant, which is a generally very sedentary job that is also often a very high stress job. And because she works in like a firm, she has to wear high heels to work. So these are all a piece of information that are kind of handy for us. Her hobbies include baking, which is a great hobby, but can often lead to like elevated sugars, desserts in particular. She likes watching movies, and she does like going for a swim. And she's been a diabetic for 10 years. She's been taking insulin daily. And even though she is a diabetic, she is in her 1st trimester. She is a diabetic and pregnant client. So she's 35 years old. Her BMI is 32.4, which puts her into our obesity category. She weighs 264 pounds, and her waist to hip ratio, which is not something that we've spent a lot of time talking about, but we will get to, is 0.95. So that is going to be in a risky segment. It is above the normal numbers that we want to see. So because her waist to hip ratio is elevated, that could actually be explaining why she is suffering from diabetes, right? We know she has a lot of excessive abdominal fat. Her overhead squat, arms falling forward, and her feet are turning out, which makes a lot of sense, feet turning out, right? Considering she has to wear those high heels, right? So that's making her gastrocnemius really overactive because she's good at plantar flexion, but she struggles with dorsiflexion. And then during her pushing and pulling assessment, we see a forward head posture. So arms fall forward and a forward head posture. That means that we're definitely going to see some overactive trap muscles, lat muscles, and pec muscles. And we guess what? Her blood pressure is pre-hypertensive, 135/85. Relatively high. Makes sense considering she's got a pretty stressful job, and that might explain why she's got all this upper body stuff going on. Assessments that we decided to do are the overhead squat, the pushing and pulling assessment. We decided to skip the cardio assessment because both of those, the Rockport and the 3-minute step test, can be relatively high impact. And so due to the pregnancy, we're going to avoid those things. We do see an elevated BMI, right? And so we want to keep an eye on that. And blood pressure testing, because of her stressful job, is going to be important. So those are the assessments that we felt are most relevant to this client. In terms of coming up with a plan for her for resistance training, cardio training, and stretching, resistance training, we want to focus on 3 days of strength training per week. And then 2 days per week, we want her to go get like a 30-minute swim. Our strength training sessions are going to be relatively short. They're only going to be about 30 minutes, so about 12 to 15 reps for 2 to 3 sets. We're probably going to do that as a circuit so that we can get through it relatively quickly. That way we don't have to do, very, very long duration exercise. We're focusing on low to moderate intensity, and we're doing compound or isolation exercises rather than total body exercises, just because total body is going to be, again, higher impact, right? If she's doing like a squat to press, that usually involves kind of a jerking motion. So we're going to avoid that and instead do something that's maybe a compound movement like a chest press or a squat separately. That's usually, if it's a chest press, chest, shoulders, and triceps, 3 body parts, nothing too crazy. Or we can do an isolation exercise, something like a chest fly, which is literally just for the chest. Cardio training, like I said, 2 days a week, 30 minutes in the pool. She should be able to hold a conversation the entire time. So we're going to encourage her to be able to, she's not out of breath, but she's breathing a little harder. Static stretches, probably actually those chest flies were a bad choice. We'll do a reverse fly. So we're going to stretch out her lats. We're going to stretch out the pecs. Teres major, we're going to do those external rotations. And then calf muscles, biceps femoris, and TFL. So here you can see we're addressing the feet turnout, and here we're addressing the forward head posture and arms falling forward. Special considerations. I like this. We told her to go buy some athletic shoes. Her shoes probably sucked. Very, very common. Most of your clients' shoes suck until you give them good advice. So we're going to encourage her to go buy some more comfortable shoes. And then changing her lifestyle habits, park farther away while she's going to the grocery store, and let's try to get some more complex carbs and start a food journal so that we can start to see a little bit more of like the kind of things we're bringing in. And see if we can start managing the weight a little bit. We're not putting this client on an intense weight loss routine. We're just encouraging them to start thinking about their diet. And that way, like once this pregnancy is over, then we can start maybe addressing those things. All right, any questions about what we chose on the SOAP notes? Pull it into conversation mode here. Do you guys have any questions about any of that stuff? Feeling good, guys? All 3 of you?
Are SOAP notes always created before you start making a plan with your client?
Not always. Like I said, it's more for like if you guys end up in like a physical therapy clinic, just a very common form of documentation. And not every PT clinic actually uses SOAP notes. It's just the ones like the 2 that I've worked in did, and then you talk to like a lot of trainers. It's just another approach. It's something we're doing for this class. that is kind of a Sochi approach to things, rather than like something that is required by like every single trainer. It's just one more thing we want you to kind of know a little bit of. You could put it on a resume in the future, you know, under like special skills. Like I know how to write soap notes, you know. But no, you don't have to. But if you are going to use them, it's always nice to have like it written out. I'll be honest, Robert, I've actually used soap notes to solve other things in my own life. Like if I have like, I'm like, man, like what's going on with like, I always use this as an example, but like I've been working, it's fresh in my mind, but like when I'm working on like my finances, for instance, every now and then I'll write down like my soap, I'll like soap it out. I don't necessarily go like SOAP, but I'll be like, all right, what do I know about my spending? What am I struggling on? How can I create like an effective plan? Does that fit with all? And I'll lay it all out so I can see it. And then it, you know, helps me kind of come up with what I need to do to solve these problems. So it's not required, but it's something you can do. Oh, speaking of forward head posture. All right, guys. If you don't have anything for me, that's all I got for you. We're going to see homework number 2 up today. Up on Canvas, you'll notice it's a little bit more about our populations. So get some more questions that are a little bit more challenging than the last one. Just are going to be about like everything from youths to seniors to diabetics to prenatal clients. And other than that, I'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll get through hump day and keep it up.
For sure. I'll see all you guys tomorrow.
Awesome. See you later, guys. Oh, where's my button?